The Spanish artist Pablo Picasso moved to Paris at the turn of the century. His first major stylistic period lasted from 1901 to 1904. The paintings from his so-called blue period are characterized by their largely monochromatic blue compositions and their somber subject matter. Picasso's blue period slightly predates the work of the Fauves, but he was similarly interested in using color to elicit emotional response. These paintings are meant to be the literal embodiment of feeling blue. From 1904 to 1906, Picasso transitioned into what's known as his Rose period. The Rose period is characterized by a warmer palette of reds, pinks, and oranges. This color scheme is more analogous than monochromatic. The subject matter of these paintings are also different than those of the blue period. The Rose period features circus performers including figures of acrobats, strongmen, and harlequins. Although these entertainers are often depicted in personal moments of melancholy, they lack the destitution of the figures from the blue period. In 1907, Picasso began a different trajectory from the emotionally expressive styles of his earlier periods. After visiting anthropological museums in Paris, Picasso was influenced by the African masks that he saw from the Ivory Coast. By taking influence from non-European arts, Picasso joined the pursuit of earlier modernists, like Degas, of expanding the visual vocabulary of Western painting. West African masks, like the one pictured, are abstractions of the human face. The standard facial features are all represented, but they have been altered or generalized from observable reality. This mask would have been intended for a ceremonial or spiritual purpose, and would have been intentionally abstracted to distinguish it from the faces of living humans. It lacked realism because it represents a spirit that is not visibly present in our observable reality. This painting from 1907, entitled Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, was the first piece in which Picasso abstracted human features to resemble those of West African masks. The female figures appear to be in varying states of transformation. The linear frontal features of some seem to reference the quickly sketched notations of caricatures. Others seem to have features that directly reference those of a wooden mask. The picture plane is broken down into a series of disjointed, angular shapes which greatly denies any illusion of space. The foreground figures meld into the background, which itself has the flatness of mere pattern. It was this mode of visual abstraction that served as the basis for one of the most influential artistic styles of the early 20th century. In 1909, Picasso teamed up with a fellow Parisian artist named Georges Braque to create the style known as Cubism. Cubism was the most radically different way of interpreting the visual world since Impressionism. While the goal of Impressionism was to reproduce the world as we optically interpret it, Cubism aimed to reproduce the world as our minds interpret it through time and space. As a larger style, Cubism can be broken down into two stages, analytical and synthetic. Analytical Cubism was the style explored by Picasso and Braque between the years 1909 and 1912. In this period, the artist analyzed and documented subjects from real life. This differed from much of the Expressionist and Post-Impressionist work, which valued imagination over observation. Still, the resulting paintings from Analytical Cubism lack the recognizable features that we associate with painting from observed reality. As I mentioned before, it was the goal of Analytical Cubism to reproduce the world as we interpret it through time and space. The things in our world are constantly moving and shifting. We not only interpret figures as they appear in three-dimensional space, but we also interpret them as they move and change through the course of time. In traditional portraiture, there is a disparity between what an artist observes and what he or she paints. A highly worked oil painting of a figure may take days to complete, yet the resulting image appears to capture a single moment in time. No matter how well the sitter can hold still, they will have inevitably changed over the course of the painting. Their expressions will alter, the quality of color and light will fluctuate, and their posture will change constantly with the act of breathing. Not to mention that the perspective of the painter changes with every slight shift in the angle of his or her vision. This painting by Georges Braque, entitled The Portuguese, depicts a man sitting in a cafe strumming on a guitar. To create this painting, Braque moved around the sitter trying to capture simultaneous views of him on a single picture plane. The rambling geometric forms make reference to all of the many moving facets of a three-dimensional subject in space. It's almost as if the artist took something three-dimensional and unrolled it onto a two-dimensional surface. The man's facial features can be seen in the top center of the composition, and his guitar can be seen in the bottom center. Even the bits of text scattered throughout the composition are derived from snippets of menus and posters that were visible in the cafe at the time. Because figure and ground relationships are unclear, any notion of conventional linear perspective are practically abolished. I like to relate analytical cubism to impressionism because they are both highly rational and formal interpretations from observation. Unlike the vibrant paintings of Impressionism through Expressionism, analytical cubism was not very interested in using color to explore emotional content. Much of Picasso and Braque's work from this period lack bright, emotive colors that might distract from the formal structure of their studies. In the tradition of artistic styles being named by others, Cubism was coined by the older artist Henri Matisse. Matisse saw these artists' early work and described their appearance as a lot of little cubes. Analytical cubism also relates to the way that our memory works. Our minds are not like cameras that are capable of taking a single snapshot. Instead, our brains take a composite of many moments that we stitch together to create a memory. If we were to then try to capture that memory on a single two-dimensional surface, it may look something like these paintings. In 1912, Picasso and Braque expanded upon the visual vocabulary of analytical cubism to create the style known as synthetic cubism. With synthetic cubism, subjects were no longer observed directly from reality. Shapes and forms were drawn with a greater sense of resolution, and color was given increased importance. References such as a violin or a basket of fruit are invented, although they share visual similarities to the analytical cubist aesthetic. Synthetic cubism also marks the first use of collage in the Western fine arts tradition. Picasso and Braque used fragments of wallpaper, newspapers, sheet music, and whatever else they could get their hands on. Collage was another way to acknowledge the flatness of the picture plane, because its surface is composed of dimensional stacked layers. Like the surface of an impasto painting, it becomes difficult to read something three-dimensional as an illusionary window.